You know that feeling when you wake up in a sterile, chrome-plated laboratory with electrodes attached to your skull and absolutely no memory of how you got there. No? Well, congratulations on living a normal life. For the rest of us poor bastards who apparently drew the short straw in the cosmic lottery, let me paint you a picture. My name's Danny Voss, and 3 hours ago I was having what I thought was the worst Monday of my life because my landlord raised my rent, and my ex-girlfriend texted me a picture of her new boyfriend's abs. Turns out Monday had some surprises left in store. The first thing I noticed wasn't the alien technology humming around me, or the fact that I was naked and strapped to what looked like a dentist's chair from hell. No, the first thing I noticed was that someone, or something, had apparently decided my body hair needed a complete makeover. I was smoother than a dolphin, which, let me tell you, is not a look I was going for. Fascinating, came a voice that sounded like someone gargling gravel through a synthesizer. The subject has achieved consciousness. I turned my head, or tried to anyway, considering the restraints, and got my first look at what I can only describe as evolution's rough draft. Picture a praying mantis. But if that praying mantis had been hitting the gym for about 6 years and had developed a serious addiction to chrome body modifications. It's his, her, their. Head swiveled toward me on a neck that bent in ways that made my chiropractor's worst nightmares look like gentle stretching exercises. Oh, good, I croaked, my voice sounding like I'd been chain-smoking sandpaper. I was hoping this was going to get weird. The mantis thing tilted its head at an angle that would have killed a human. The specimen exhibits verbal communication capabilities beyond our initial assessments. Most intriguing. Specimen? I tested the restraints. They didn't budge, but I wasn't exactly surprised. Alien tech probably wasn't held together with twist ties and good intentions. Look, Bugzilla, I don't know what kind of nature documentary you think you're filming here, but I'm going to need you to update my casting contract. I don't remember signing up for Naked Human Gets Probed by Giant Insects, the unauthorized biography. The creature moved closer, and I got a better look at what I was dealing with. Its eyes were compound like a fly's, but larger and more aware. It had 4 arms, 2 of which ended in hands that looked disturbingly human, except for the extra joints, and the fact that each finger ended in what appeared to be a surgical instrument. Your species possesses an unusual psychological resilience, it said, making notes on what looked like a tablet made of liquid mercury. Most subjects achieve catatonia within the first few minutes of consciousness. Yeah, well, most subjects probably didn't spend 3 years in retail, I replied. After dealing with customers who think the customer is always right, applies to basic physics, alien abduction is honestly a step up. The bug, and I was definitely going with bug, because I refused to give this thing the dignity of a proper species name until it at least offered me some clothes, paused in its note-taking. Retail? You know, selling stuff to people who hate you for reasons that predate your birth and extend beyond your eventual death. I tested the restraints again. Still nothing. It's a human tradition. We're very fond of traditions that make us miserable. Your species willingly subjects itself to psychological torture for economic reasons? Oh, buddy, if you think retail is bad, wait until I tell you about middle management. The bug's head did that impossible tilt thing again. We may have underestimated your species' capacity for adaptation. We're like cockroaches, I agreed cheerfully, except with opposable thumbs and an alarming tendency to make everything worse through the power of good intentions. That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in almost immediately, bathing everything in a red glow that made the whole situation feel less like a medical procedure and more like a really avant-garde haunted house. Alarms started blaring. Apparently, the universal language of, oh shit, something's gone wrong, translates across species. What the hell? I started to say, but the bug was already moving, all 4 arms working frantically at various control panels. Impossible, it muttered. The containment protocols are absolute. Nothing could. The explosion that cut off its sentence was close enough that I felt the heat through the walls. The building? Ship? Space station? Alien McDonald's? Shuddered like a dog trying to shake off fleas. Okay, I said conversationally, as if I wasn't strapped naked to an alien operating table while what sounded like a war zone erupted around us. So that's probably not part of the regularly scheduled programming. The bug was frantically inputting commands on its Mercury tablet. The facility is under attack. This should not be possible. Our location was classified beyond even our own security clearance. You know, I said, as another explosion rocked the building. In my experience, whenever someone says something is impossible, the universe takes that as a personal challenge. the bug's compound eyes fixed on me with what I was starting to recognize as alien exasperation. Your species appears incapable of appropriate fear responses. Oh, I'm terrified, I assured it. It's just that terror and I have reached an understanding. I stay functional, and terror gets to redecorate my digestive system however it wants. Another explosion closer this time. The lights flickered, and I heard the distinctive sound of metal being separated from other metal, in ways that were probably not covered under the manufacturer's warranty. Look, Doc Mantis, I said. I don't suppose this would be a good time to discuss unlocking these restraints. Because from where I'm sitting, which is admittedly a very limited perspective, it sounds like your facility's security system is having what we humans would call a very bad day. The bug hesitated for exactly 0.3 seconds before its fingers started dancing over what I assumed were the release controls. If you attempt to flee, you will be recaptured and subjected to significantly less comfortable accommodations. Understood. And hey, thanks for the trust exercise. Really building bridges between our species here. The restraints released with a soft hiss, and I sat up, immediately discovering that alien examining tables were apparently not designed with human comfort in mind. Everything ached in ways I didn't know were possible. There is emergency containment gear in the storage unit to your left, the bug said, already moving toward what looked like the world's most complicated door. I must report to the command center. I looked down at myself, then at the bug. Just to clarify, we're talking actual clothes, not some kind of alien body paint that's going to leave me looking like I lost a fight with a rainbow, right? The bug paused. Your species is remarkably focused on textile coverage. It's not about modesty, I explained, sliding off the table and immediately regretting every life choice that had led me to this moment. It's about dignity, and also the fact that I'm pretty sure my nipples could cut glass right now, and that's not a tactical advantage I want to advertise. I found the storage unit and, miracle of miracles, it actually contained something that looked like clothes. Granted, they looked like clothes designed by someone who had heard the concept of human clothing described by someone who had only seen humans from a great distance while heavily intoxicated, but they covered the important parts. The outfit consisted of what appeared to be a jumpsuit made from material that felt like wearing liquid metal but moved like fabric. It was surprisingly comfortable, if you ignored the fact that it made me look like I was cosplaying as a chrome burrito. Fashion forward, I muttered, then looked around for the bug, only to discover it had vanished while I was getting dressed. Great. Abandoned in an alien facility under attack by unknown hostiles. This is definitely going on my resume under unique experiences. The building shook again, and this time I heard something that made my blood freeze. The sound of voices. Human voices. Screaming. Now, I'm not what you'd call a hero. Heroes are those guys who run toward danger while making inspirational speeches about duty and sacrifice. I'm more the guy who runs toward danger while composing increasingly creative insults about whoever caused the danger in the first place. It's a subtle but important distinction. But those screams sounded like people who were having a significantly worse day than I was, which, considering my circumstances, was really saying something. I found the door controls. Apparently aliens were also familiar with the concept of big obvious button that opens things, and stepped out into a corridor that looked like someone had taken a hospital, a spaceship, and a modern art museum, and then blended them together while blindfolded. The screams were coming from my left, so naturally, that's where I headed. The corridor branched into a T-intersection, and I could see lights flashing from the right branch. Emergency lighting strobed in patterns that probably meant something important in alien emergency management, but to me just screamed, Disco of Doom. I followed the sounds of distress, which led me to what appeared to be a larger laboratory space. This one was less individual examination room and more industrial processing facility, which was about as ominous as it sounds. What I found there made my stomach do things that defied several laws of physics. There were humans, lots of them, all in various states of restraint and apparent experimentation. Some were conscious, some weren't, and some were in that unfortunate middle ground where they were aware enough to know something terrible was happening, but not coherent enough to do anything about it. Well, I said to the room in general, this is significantly more apocalyptic than my usual Monday. That's when I noticed the aliens. These weren't like my mantis friend. These were different. Imagine if someone had taken a spider, given it opposable thumbs, and then sent it to medical school with a specialty in things that make humans uncomfortable. They moved with a liquid grace that was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, their 8 legs allowing them to walk on walls and ceiling as easily as on the floor. One of them noticed me standing in the doorway. "Ah," it said in a voice like silk being torn. "The specimen from Laboratory 7 has achieved mobility." Specimen? I looked around at the dozen or so spider aliens currently doing unpleasant things to my fellow humans. You know, I'm starting to take that personally. The spider that had noticed me began moving in my direction, and I had a moment to appreciate just how much more intimidating an 8-foot-tall spider was when it was actively trying to kill you, versus when it was just hanging out in your garage being generally antisocial. "Return to your designated examination area," it commanded. "Further movement will result in punitive measures." I looked around the laboratory again, at the humans strapped to tables, at the alien equipment that was clearly not designed with human welfare in mind, at the spider aliens who were treating my species like we were particularly interesting lab rats. Then I looked at the fire suppression system mounted on the ceiling. "You know what?" I said conversationally. "I think I'm going to pass on that." I jumped. Now I should mention that I'm not particularly athletic. I played JV basketball in high school, and my claim to fame was being the guy who once made a three-pointer by accident while trying to pass to someone else. But fear and adrenaline are amazing motivators, and apparently, alien gravity was slightly different from Earth's because I managed to grab onto the fire suppression system with a grace that surprised everyone, including myself. The spider alien looked up at me with what I could only assume was confusion. "That behavior is not within predicted parameters." "Yeah, well, that's humans for you," I said, then did something that I'm still not entirely sure was brilliant or the stupidest thing I've ever done. I started twisting the fire suppression nozzle. Turns out, alien fire suppression systems are not filled with water. The substance that came spraying out was clear and odorless. But the moment it hit the spider aliens, they started making noises that sounded like someone was torturing a violin. They began convulsing, their legs scrambling for purchase on surfaces that had suddenly become as slippery as ice. "Well, that's interesting," I observed, as chaos erupted below me. The suppression system was clearly designed to cover the entire laboratory, because nozzles were activating all around the room, spraying the mystery substance everywhere. The spider aliens were not handling it well. They were slipping, sliding, and generally behaving like creatures that had suddenly found themselves in a world made entirely of banana peels. I dropped down from the suppression system, landing with significantly less grace than I'd achieved in getting up there. The floor was now covered in whatever the alien equivalent of fire retardant was, which made walking an adventure in applied physics. But the spider aliens were having a much worse time than I was. "The bipedal locomotion system appears to have advantages in low-traction environments," I noted to one of the aliens as I skated past it. It tried to grab me with one of its legs, but the lack of purchase meant it mostly just waved futilely in my general direction. I made my way to the nearest human. A woman who looked like she was about my age and appeared to be conscious but thoroughly confused by recent developments. "Hey there," I said, working on the restraints that held her to the examination table. "I'm Danny, and I'm apparently your rescue squad today. I apologize in advance for the quality of service, but this is my first alien rescue operation, so we're all kind of improvising." "Are you real?" she asked weakly. "That's actually a pretty deep philosophical question under the circumstances," I replied, getting the restraints loose. "But I'm at least as real as anything else that's happened to you today, so let's go with yes." The woman, I mentally dubbed her fellow abductee number 1, sat up slowly. "What did you do to them?" I looked around at the spider aliens, who were still struggling with basic locomotion. I introduced them to the concept of unplanned slip and slide. Turns out evolution didn't prepare them for ice skating. "That's..." She paused, watching one of the aliens attempt to walk up a wall and instead slide down it like it was coated in butter. "That's actually kind of hilarious. Right? I mean, it's still a horrific situation involving alien abduction and medical experimentation, but at least now it's a horrific situation with slapstick comedy elements." I helped her stand, which was an adventure since the floor was still slick enough to double as a hockey rink. "Can you walk?" "I think so." She took a tentative step, wobbled, and grabbed my arm. "What's the plan?" I looked around the laboratory. There were still about 10 other humans in various states of consciousness, all of whom needed to be freed. The spider aliens were temporarily incapacitated but probably wouldn't stay that way forever. And somewhere in this facility were my mantis buddy and whatever other alien species were involved in this operation. "Honestly," I said, "I was kind of hoping you'd have some ideas, because my long-term planning skills got us as far as spray aliens with mystery chemical, and then just sort of..." stopped. That's when the explosion started getting closer. The building shook hard enough that some of the equipment fell over, which would have been more concerning if we weren't already in the middle of what appeared to be an active war zone. "What the hell is attacking this place?" Fellow abductee number 1 asked. I have no idea, I admitted, helping her toward the next examination table. But I'm starting to hope it's the good guys. We worked our way through the laboratory, freeing humans as we went. Most of them were in rough shape, disoriented, drugged, or just plain traumatized, but they were mobile, which was the important thing. The spider aliens were starting to recover, figuring out how to move more carefully on the slick surfaces. This was problematic for several reasons, not least of which was that they still outnumbered us and had home field advantage. We need to get out of here, said fellow abductee number 3, a guy who looked like he'd been a gym teacher before his abduction. These things are going to figure out how to move again soon. Agreed, I said, looking around for anything that might serve as a weapon, or at least a distraction. Anyone see an exit that doesn't involve going through the spider convention? There, said fellow abductee number 2, pointing toward what looked like a service corridor. That looks like it might lead somewhere useful. We started moving as a group toward the corridor, which was about as stealthy as you'd expect a group of recently freed alien abduction victims to be while traversing a surface that was essentially one giant slip and slide. One of the spider aliens managed to intercept us, moving more carefully but still struggling with traction. It reared up on its hind legs, front legs weaving in what was probably a threatening gesture, but mostly looked like it was trying to conduct an invisible orchestra. Specimens will return to designated examination areas, it commanded. Or what? I asked. You'll slip and fall on us? The alien tried to lunge forward and immediately discovered that momentum and low traction make for poor bedfellows. It slid past us like a very large, very angry hockey puck. I retract my earlier statement, I said to the group. This is definitely the best part of being abducted by aliens. We made it to the service corridor, which was thankfully not coated in alien fire retardant. The corridor was narrow and clearly designed for maintenance access rather than comfort, but it was also unoccupied by hostile aliens, which made it the best real estate we'd seen all day. Do we have any idea where we're going? Asked fellow abductee number 4, a woman who looked like she'd been an accountant in her pre-abduction life. Away from the spider aliens, I replied. Beyond that, I'm open to suggestions. The corridor branched ahead of us, and I could hear sounds coming from both directions. From the left, more of those silk-tearing voices that meant spider aliens. From the right, what sounded like combat. Combat, said fellow abductee number 3. Definitely going toward the combat. Are you insane? Demanded fellow abductee number 1. Combat means violence. Yeah, I agreed. But it also means someone is fighting the aliens. And right now, I'll take unknown violent situation over known medical experimentation situation any day. We went right. The sounds of combat got louder as we moved, and soon we could make out individual sounds. Energy weapons firing, something that sounded like metal being torn apart, and voices shouting in what I was pretty sure was English. Oh good, I muttered. Either Earth finally sent a rescue mission, or the aliens have developed a really cruel sense of irony. The corridor ended in what appeared to be an observation deck overlooking a large hangar bay. And what a hangar bay it was. The space was enormous, easily the size of an aircraft hangar, and filled with what were clearly spacecraft of various alien designs. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was the running battle taking place across the hangar floor. On one side, we had the spider aliens, along with my mantis buddy and what appeared to be several other species of aliens that I hadn't met yet. They were all armed with weapons that looked like they'd been designed by someone who thought regular guns weren't sufficiently science fiction. On the other side, holy shit, breathed fellow abductee number 2. Are those humans? They were indeed humans, but not like any humans I'd ever seen. These humans were wearing armor that looked like it had been cobbled together from alien technology and human ingenuity. Their weapons were clearly of mixed origin. Some looked human, some looked alien, and some looked like someone had gotten creative with a welding torch and a really impressive junkyard. But what really caught my attention was the fact that they were winning. The aliens had superior numbers, superior technology, and home field advantage. The humans had attitude, creativity, and what appeared to be a complete lack of respect for the established rules of engagement. As I watched, one of the armored humans simply ran up the side of a spacecraft, using what looked like magnetic boots, and dropped a grenade into an alien weapon emplacement. The explosion sent spider aliens scattering like spiders when someone turns on the lights. I think, I said slowly, we've just discovered what was attacking this facility. But how? Asked fellow abductee number 1. How did humans find this place? How do they have alien technology? You know what? I said, watching another human soldier improvise a rocket launcher out of what appeared to be alien plumbing fixtures and a fire extinguisher. I'm going to guess that someone, somewhere, seriously underestimated humans. That's when one of the armored figures noticed us in the observation deck. The helmet turned in our direction, and I could see the visor adjusting as it focused on us. The figure raised one hand and spoke into what was clearly a communication device. A moment later, the voice came through speakers mounted around the observation deck. Unidentified humans in Observation Deck 7. This is Sergeant Rodriguez of the Human Liberation Front. Are you friendly, or are you having a really bad day? I looked at my fellow abductees, then leaned toward what I hoped was a communication pickup. Sergeant Rodriguez, this is Danny Voss, and we are definitely having a really bad day. We're escaped abduction victims, currently unarmed, and open to any rescue suggestions you might have. Roger that, Mr. Voss. Stand by for extraction. Try not to get killed by any aliens in the next 5 minutes. We'll do our best, I replied. But we're all pretty new to this whole not getting killed by aliens thing, so no promises. The battle in the hangar was winding down, mostly because the humans had developed what appeared to be an effective strategy of hit the aliens with everything that explodes until they stop moving. It was crude, but it was working. Within 10 minutes, the hangar was secure, and we found ourselves being escorted down to the hangar floor by soldiers who looked like they'd stepped out of a science fiction movie. Sergeant Rodriguez turned out to be a woman who looked like she'd been carved out of determination and powered by pure stubbornness. Her armor was clearly improvised but functional, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd been making aliens regret their life choices for quite some time. "How long have you been here?" she asked as we reached the hangar floor. I woke up about... I checked my wrist, discovered I wasn't wearing a watch, and realized I had no idea what time it was, or even what planet I was on. Actually, that's a good question. What year is it? Rodriguez looked concerned. It's 2026, Mr. Voss. How long do you think you've been missing? Well, when I went to sleep last night, it was 2024, I said. So either I've been unconscious for a really long time, or I've traveled through time. Or this is all an extremely elaborate dream brought on by eating gas station sushi. Rodriguez exchanged glances with one of her soldiers. Mr. Voss, you and your fellow abductees have been missing for approximately 18 months. This facility has been conducting long-term experiments on humans for the past several years. 18 months? I looked around at the other abductees. That actually explains why I feel like I've been hit by a truck that was being driven by another truck. The aliens have been using some kind of temporal dilation technology, Rodriguez explained. Time passes differently in their experimental chambers. To you, it might have felt like hours or days, but in real time. 18 months, I finished. Well, that's deeply disturbing on several levels. Mr. Voss, said one of Rodriguez's soldiers, how did you manage to escape from the holding areas? Our intelligence suggested that was impossible. I gestured toward the corridor we'd come from. I introduced the spider aliens to the concept of improv comedy, specifically physical comedy involving unintentional pratfalls. Rodriguez stared at me. You what? I activated the fire suppression system in their laboratory. Turns out whatever they use for fire suppressant makes surfaces incredibly slick, and 8-legged creatures have a hard time maintaining balance on slick surfaces. You disabled an entire laboratory full of hostile aliens with a fire suppression system? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds almost competent, I admitted. Trust me, it was much more chaotic and accidental than you're making it sound. Rodriguez turned to her soldiers. Make a note. Human creative problem-solving continues to exceed all projections. Excuse me, I said, but did you just say continues to exceed all projections? Like this is a regular thing? Mr. Voss, Rodriguez said, the Human Liberation Front has been conducting rescue operations like this for the past 3 years. Do you know how we usually find facilities like this one? GPS? We follow the trail of destruction left by escaped human test subjects. I blinked. Come again? Aliens keep underestimating humans, explained one of the soldiers. They think we're just clever animals. They don't understand that we're clever animals with a pathological inability to accept situations we don't like. So you're telling me, I said slowly, that humans have been escaping from alien facilities by basically improvising our way out of captivity? Last month, we rescued a group from a facility where the test subjects had convinced the aliens that humans required daily recreational combat for proper health maintenance, Rodriguez said. They'd turned their holding area into a gladiatorial arena and were betting on the matches with their captors. The month before that, added another soldier, we found a facility where the humans had convinced the aliens that our species reproduced through musical theater. The aliens had been forcing them to perform increasingly elaborate productions of human mating displays. "They were doing Oklahoma when we arrived," said a third soldier. "The aliens had built them a full theatrical stage." I stared at them. "Are you telling me that humans have been bullshitting our way out of alien captivity through the power of creative lying?" "Among other methods," Rodriguez confirmed. "There was the facility where the humans convinced the aliens that we were a hive mind species and needed to be kept in groups to maintain psychological stability. They'd basically turned their imprisonment into a social club. Or the one where they convinced the aliens that humans required constant mental stimulation or we'd die of boredom," added a soldier. "The aliens ended up giving them access to their computer systems to keep them entertained." "Let me guess," I said. "They used that access to call for help." "They used it to order pizza," Rodriguez corrected. "But the pizza delivery guy was one of our intelligence assets, so it worked out." I looked around at my fellow abductees who were listening to this conversation with expressions that suggested they were re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about human nature. "So what you're saying," I said, "is that humanity's response to alien abduction has been to turn it into an improvisational comedy routine." "More or less," Rodriguez agreed. "We've had to develop an entire tactical doctrine around the assumption that any human who's been captured by aliens for more than 72 hours has probably convinced them of at least 3 completely false things about our species." "What's the weirdest one so far?" Rodriguez considered this. "There was the group that convinced their captors that humans were actually a collective organism made up of individual cells, and that separating us caused us to go insane and develop supernatural powers." "Did it work?" "The aliens were so terrified of creating psychic humans that they kept all the prisoners together in luxury accommodations and refused to conduct any experiments on them." "That's—" I paused. "Actually, that's brilliant." "It gets better," said one of the soldiers. "When we arrived to rescue them, the humans had convinced the aliens that the rescue team was actually a manifestation of the collective consciousness coming to retrieve its separated cells." "So the aliens just let them go?" "The aliens helped load them onto our ships," Rodriguez confirmed. "They were convinced that interfering would cause humanity to achieve its final form and conquer the galaxy." I looked around the hangar, taking in the improvised human technology, the confused-looking alien prisoners, and the general air of barely controlled chaos that seemed to follow my species wherever it went. "You know what?" I said finally. "I think I'm starting to understand why aliens keep underestimating us." "Oh?" Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" "Because we keep doing things that make no sense from a rational perspective, but somehow work anyway," I explained. "Like turning alien fire suppression systems into slip-and-slide warfare, or convincing advanced civilizations that we reproduce through Broadway musicals." "It's not that the things we do don't make sense," corrected one of the soldiers. "It's that they don't make sense to species that evolved differently than we did. Most aliens evolved in environments where following established patterns was the key to survival," Rodriguez added. "Humans evolved in an environment where the only predictable thing was that nothing was predictable. So when aliens encounter humans, they try to fit us into their understanding of how rational beings should behave," I said. "And when we don't fit, they assume we're not intelligent enough to be a real threat," Rodriguez finished. "Right up until we turn their own fire suppression systems against them and escape from their inescapable facilities." "Speaking of which," said fellow abductee number 1, "what happens now? Do we just go home?" Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "Well, that's complicated." "Complicated how?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. "Mr. Voss, what's the last thing you remember before waking up in the alien laboratory?" I thought about it. "I was in my apartment in Chicago. It was Monday night. I was watching TV and I fell asleep on the couch." "And the rest of you?" The other abductees shared similar stories. Normal people doing normal things, then waking up in alien laboratories with no memory of how they'd gotten there. "The thing is," Rodriguez said carefully, "according to our intelligence, this facility has been operational for over 5 years. The aliens have been abducting humans for experimentation during that entire time." "Okay," I said, though I was getting a bad feeling about where this was going. "What does that have to do with us going home?" "Mr. Voss, in the time since you were abducted, first contact with several alien species has been officially established. Earth has formed the Terran Defense Alliance. We've colonized 6 star systems and established trade relationships with 14 alien governments." I stared at her. Are you telling me that while I was unconscious, humanity went from "are we alone in the universe" to galactic trading partner? Not quite, Rodriguez said. More like galactic troublemaker that everyone's afraid to ignore. How did that happen? Well, Rodriguez said, it turns out that when you spend several years rescuing human abduction victims who've been convincing aliens that humanity is variously a hive mind, a collective organism, a species that reproduces through musical theater, and a race of sleeping gods who shouldn't be awakened, word gets around. Word gets around? I repeated. The galactic community is now under the impression that humans are either the most dangerous species in known space, or completely insane, or both, explained one of the soldiers. Most governments have decided that the safest approach is to treat us as equals and hope we don't do anything too unpredictable. But we are doing unpredictable things, I pointed out. Exactly, Rodriguez said cheerfully. It's working perfectly. I looked around at the hangar, where human soldiers were efficiently stripping alien technology from captured spacecraft, while alien prisoners sat in neat rows, looking like they were trying very hard not to attract attention. So let me get this straight, I said. Humanity has achieved galactic recognition not through superior technology, or diplomatic brilliance, or military might, but through our reputation as the species that's so crazy that nobody wants to find out what we'll do next. That's a pretty accurate summary, Rodriguez agreed. And this is working? Mr. Voss, 6 months ago, the Galactic Trade Council offered humanity full membership after a human delegation convinced them that denying us membership might cause us to achieve our true potential and evolve beyond their understanding. What was our true potential exactly? No one asked, Rodriguez said. They were too afraid to find out. I sat down on a conveniently placed alien crate and tried to process this information. So, I said finally, I fell asleep as a retail worker in Chicago, and I'm waking up as a member of a galactic civilization that achieved interstellar recognition through advanced psychological warfare disguised as being too weird to fight. That's actually a pretty good way to put it, Rodriguez agreed. And there's no going back to the way things were. Mr. Voss, would you want to go back to working retail after learning that humanity has become the galactic equivalent of that guy at the party who might be fun or might be insane, but definitely shouldn't be ignored? I considered this. I thought about my apartment in Chicago, my job at the electronics store, my ex-girlfriend who'd dumped me for a guy with better abs, my landlord who'd raised my rent, and the general grinding mundanity of life as a 20-something human in the early 21st century. Then I looked around at the alien hangar, where humans in improvised power armor were casually looting advanced technology, while their former captors sat quietly and tried not to make eye contact. You know what? I said. I think I'm okay with this timeline. Glad to hear it, Rodriguez said, because the Human Liberation Front is always looking for new recruits, and anyone who can disable an entire alien facility with a fire suppression system definitely has the kind of creative problem-solving skills we need. Hold on, I said. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to help rescue other humans who are in the same situation you were in an hour ago, Rodriguez replied. Plus, the benefits package includes access to alien technology, travel to exotic locations throughout the galaxy, and the opportunity to continue humanity's proud tradition of confusing the hell out of advanced civilizations. I looked at my fellow abductees. What about them? Same offer applies to anyone who wants it, Rodriguez said. Though we understand if some of you would prefer to return to Earth and try to readjust to civilian life. Fellow abductee number 1, I really needed to start asking people their names, raised her hand tentatively. What's Earth like now? I mean, with all the alien contact and everything? Chaotic, admitted one of Rodriguez's soldiers. But chaotic in a good way, mostly. We've got alien exchange students, interstellar internet, and you can get authentic Vkr'lak cuisine delivered to your door in most major cities. What about jobs? Asked fellow abductee number 3. I mean, what do humans do in a galactic economy? Turns out our reputation for creative problem-solving makes us very popular as consultants, Rodriguez explained. Half the governments in this sector have humans on retainer to help them figure out solutions to problems that their own scientists can't crack. And the other half? I asked. Have humans on retainer to make sure we don't accidentally solve their problems in ways that make everything worse, Rodriguez said cheerfully. That's honestly pretty accurate for our species, I admitted. There's also entertainment, added another soldier. Human improvisational theater is apparently the hottest thing in galactic culture right now. Something about our ability to create coherent narratives out of complete chaos. Wait, said fellow abductee number 2. Are you telling me that humanity has become famous throughout the galaxy for making stuff up as we go along? Making stuff up as we go along. Making it work despite all reason and making it entertaining to watch. Rodriguez corrected. The Galactic Broadcasting Network has 3 different reality shows following human colonization efforts. What are they called? I asked, morbidly curious. Humans. What will they think of next? Colony Chaos, the human edition, and Oops, They Did It Again, a human space opera. Rodriguez recited. The last one won 6 Galactic Entertainment Awards last year. I stared at her. Our species has become a reality TV show. Our species has become several reality TV shows, Rodriguez corrected, and a documentary series, 3 different comedy programs, and something called a dramedy that I don't entirely understand, but apparently has very high ratings. Are we getting royalties for this? Actually, yes, Rodriguez said. The entertainment revenue from human-focused programming is one of the major sources of funding for the Terran Defense Alliance. I sat back down on the alien crate. So let me see if I've got this right. Humanity discovered by accident that our natural tendency toward chaos and improvisation makes us both effective at escaping alien captivity and entertaining to watch. We've parlayed this into galactic citizenship, interstellar trade relationships, and our own entertainment empire. Don't forget the consulting fees, added a soldier. And the consulting fees, I agreed. All because aliens keep underestimating our ability to turn any situation into something completely different from what they expected. That's a fair summary, Rodriguez said. I looked around the hangar again. The alien prisoners were being loaded onto what appeared to be a human transport ship, though human might have been a generous description, since it looked like someone had taken an alien vessel and modified it with what appeared to be Earth construction techniques, and a truly impressive disregard for aesthetic consistency. What happens to them? I asked, nodding toward the aliens. Prisoner exchange, Rodriguez explained. We'll trade them back to their governments for any humans they might have in captivity, plus reparations, plus a formal apology. Do they usually agree to that? They do when the alternative is having us show up to rescue our people personally, Rodriguez said. Most alien governments have decided that it's much easier to negotiate with humans than to try to contain us when we're motivated. Because of our reputation? Because of our track record, corrected one of the soldiers. Last year, a group of human tourists got arrested on Kepler 442b for disturbing the peace by singing karaoke too loudly. The local government refused to release them. What happened? 3 days later, the humans had convinced half the prison population that karaoke was a form of religious expression, organized a jailbreak that doubled as a musical revue, and accidentally started a cultural revolution that overthrew the planetary government. I blinked. They started a revolution with karaoke? The new government made karaoke the official planetary pastime and asked the humans to stay on as cultural advisors, Rodriguez added. They're still there, as far as I know. Last report said they were working on introducing the concept of competitive cooking shows. So our tourists accidentally conquered a planet through the power of musical entertainment? Conquered is a strong word, Rodriguez said. More like culturally assimilated through aggressive friendship. And this kind of thing happens regularly? Mr. Voss, there's a reason why most alien governments now have entire departments dedicated to human incident management, Rodriguez explained. We're not trying to cause chaos, we're just really good at it. It's a gift, agreed one of the soldiers. I stood up and walked over to where the other abductees were talking quietly among themselves. They all looked like people who were trying to process information that didn't quite fit into their understanding of how the universe was supposed to work. So, I said to the group, what's the consensus? Anyone want to go back to Earth and pretend this never happened? Fellow abductee number 1, whose name I finally learned was Lisa, shook her head. I was a librarian in Portland. My biggest excitement was dealing with patrons who returned books late. After today, she gestured around the alien hangar. I think I'm ready for a career change. I was an insurance adjuster, said fellow abductee number 3, who turned out to be named Bob. I spent my days trying to figure out if people were lying about car accidents. This seems like a natural progression. Fellow abductee number 2, Mike, was nodding slowly. I was a middle manager at a software company. My job was basically to translate between people who understood technology and people who understood money. Apparently, that's now a transferable skill to interspecies relations. What about you? Lisa asked fellow abductee number 4. I was a kindergarten teacher, she said. Her name was Elena. I spent my days managing groups of small humans who were convinced that the rules of reality were more like guidelines. I think I'm uniquely qualified for this new world. I looked at them all, then back at Rodriguez and her team. You know what? I think we're all in. Excellent, Rodriguez said. Welcome to the Human Liberation Front. Your first assignment will be 3 weeks of orientation on Earth, followed by basic training in alien technology, interspecies psychology, and advanced improvisation techniques. Advanced improvisation techniques? I asked. It's a required course, explained one of the soldiers. You learn how to convincingly bullshit your way through situations involving alien cultures you've never encountered before. Is that a real job skill now? Mr. Voss, it's one of the most valuable job skills in the galaxy, Rodriguez said. The ability to walk into a completely unknown situation and somehow turn it to your advantage through sheer creativity and confidence is something that most species simply cannot do. But humans can. Humans excel at it, Rodriguez confirmed. We think it's because we evolved in an environment where the ability to adapt quickly to unexpected situations was a survival advantage. So our entire species is basically really good at improv comedy? Our entire species is really good at taking whatever situation we find ourselves in and turning it into something completely different, Rodriguez corrected. Sometimes that's comedy, sometimes it's diplomacy, sometimes it's accidental revolution, and sometimes it's turning alien fire suppression systems into slip-and-slide weapons. All right, I said. I'm officially convinced. Sign me up for the Galactic Chaos Brigade. Rodriguez smiled. I think you're going to fit right in, Mr. Voss. As we boarded the human transport ship, I took one last look around the alien facility. Somewhere in there, my mantis buddy was probably filing a report about how his simple specimen had somehow managed to disable an entire laboratory and escape with a group of other humans. I wondered what he was going to write in that report. Probably something about how humans exhibited unexpected problem-solving capabilities and resistance to standard containment protocols. What he probably wouldn't write was that humans were just really, really good at refusing to accept situations we didn't like, and that we had an almost supernatural ability to find the one thing in any environment that could be repurposed into a solution to our current problem. Which was fine by me. Let the aliens keep underestimating us. It was working out pretty well so far. As the transport ship lifted off, I settled into a seat that had clearly been designed for someone with a completely different body structure than humans, but which someone had modified with what appeared to be earth furniture cushions, and a cup holder that definitely hadn't been part of the original design. So, I said to Lisa, who had taken the seat next to me, any regrets about leaving the library? She looked out the window at the alien facility shrinking below us, then at the starfield beyond that, then at the other humans around us who were chatting excitedly about their new lives as interstellar chaos agents. You know, she said, I always thought my life was boring. Turns out, I was just waiting for the right opportunity to become interesting. And accidentally starting interstellar incidents counts as interesting? Danny, she said, I spent 18 months as an alien test subject, and escaped by watching you turn their laboratory into a slapstick comedy routine. After today, I think my definition of interesting has been permanently recalibrated. I leaned back in my improvised seat and watched the stars scroll by outside the window. Somewhere out there was Earth, where humans were apparently building an interstellar civilization based on our natural talent for creative chaos. Somewhere else out there were alien governments trying to figure out how to deal with a species that seemed to approach every problem from a completely unexpected angle. And somewhere in between was me, Danny Voss, former retail worker, current liberated alien test subject, and future member of humanity's galaxy-wide reputation for turning any situation into something completely different from what anyone expected. You know what? I thought as the transport ship jumped to hyperspace with a sensation that felt like being turned inside out and then reassembled in the wrong order. This is definitely better than working retail, even if I still had no idea what I was doing. But then again, based on what I'd learned today, not knowing what we were doing was pretty much humanity's superpower. And honestly, that seemed to be working out just fine. Epilogue. 6 months later. Agent Voss, report, came Rodriguez's voice through my communication headset. I looked around the alien marketplace where I was currently hiding behind a stall that sold what appeared to be musical fruit. The situation had, as usual, gotten complicated in ways that defied all reasonable expectation. Well, Sergeant, I said, the good news is that I've successfully made contact with the human captives. And the bad news? The bad news is that they've convinced their captors that humans are actually a subspecies of highly intelligent space dolphins, and that removing us from our natural aquatic environment will cause us to evolve into our true form as psychic beings of pure energy. There was a long pause. "Agent Voss," Rodriguez said finally, "please tell me you're not about to do what I think you're about to do." I looked at the large fountain in the center of the marketplace, then at the group of confused aliens who were currently debating whether or not they should put the human captives back in water. "I'm going to need you to define what you think I'm about to do," I said, "Agent Voss. Because if you think I'm about to jump into that fountain and pretend to undergo a mystical transformation while making dolphin noises, then you're absolutely right, and I'll see you at the extraction point in 20 minutes. Voss, wait. But I was already moving. After all, we had a reputation to maintain. And besides, someone had to keep the galaxy interesting. And Professor Kethvar had been teaching military history at the Galactic Defense Academy for exactly 47 standard years, which was roughly equivalent to way too damn long in most species measurements. His crystalline carapace had dulled from its once brilliant azure to something that resembled a particularly moody sapphire, and his compound eyes had developed that 1,000-yard stare that only comes from explaining the same tactical blunders to fresh-faced cadets for nearly 5 decades. Today's lesson was supposed to be routine. Just another boring tactical analysis of a famous skirmish that most civilized species had relegated to footnote status in their history books. The Battle of Kepler 442b, or as it was more commonly known throughout the galaxy. That time the humans did something stupidly heroic again. The holographic display flickered to life above the lecture pit, casting blue-white light across the amphitheater filled with cadets from 17 different species. Most were taking notes with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The Zentaurians were frantically scribbling with all 4 hands. The gas-based ethereals were pulsing in what passed for concentrated attention. And the humans. Well, the humans were being humans, which is to say they were slouched in their seats with that peculiar mixture of boredom and barely contained chaos that seemed to be their species' default setting. Today we examine what military historians classify as a Category 7 Pyrrhic victory, Professor Kethvar began, his translator automatically adjusting his chittering into the Academy's standard galactic common. The defense of Research Station Omega-7 during the 3rd wave of the Hive War. A few cadets perked up. The Hive War was recent enough to still have some sting to it, even though it had ended nearly a decade ago. Recent enough that some of their instructors had actually served in it. Recent enough that some of them had lost family to those kittenous bastards who'd decided that the galaxy needed more insect-based nightmares and fewer breathing room. The hologram shifted, showing a small, insignificant-looking orbital station hanging in the void around an equally insignificant-looking planet. To most species, Kepler 442b was just another rock with an atmosphere that would probably kill you if you tried to breathe it. To humans, it was pleasantly rural and had decent soil composition. Omega-7 housed approximately 300 researchers from 15 species. Kethvar continued, warming to his subject. The station's defensive capabilities were minimal. 2 outdated plasma turrets, shields that could barely stop a particularly aggressive meteor, and a complement of 12 security officers armed with equipment that was, charitably speaking, vintage. A few chuckles rippled through the amphitheater. Everyone knew that vintage in military speak meant should have been replaced when your great-grandmother was still in diapers. However, the professor's voice took on that tone that indicated he was about to drop the other shoe. The station also housed the final stages of Project Mindbridge, a revolutionary breakthrough in cross-species neural interfacing that promised to solve communication barriers between carbon and silicon-based life forms. Now he had their attention. Project Mindbridge was the stuff of legend, the breakthrough that had eventually led to the current era of unprecedented interspecies cooperation. Before Mindbridge, getting a crystalline to understand a mammalian's emotional state was like trying to explain color to someone who'd been blind since birth, while speaking through a universal translator that occasionally decided to substitute random profanity for technical terms. When the Hive detected the station's research, they dispatched a battle group consisting of 3 destroyer-class bioships and approximately 800 warrior drones. Kethvar gestured, and the hologram populated with the familiar nightmare shapes of Hive vessels, all organic curves and chitinous armor, looking like someone had taken a spider, fed it nothing but steroids and bad intentions, then taught it to fly. Against this force, the station had... He paused for dramatic effect. 17 humans from the 42nd Terran Medical Corps, who'd been conducting psychological evaluations on the research teams. The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either laughter or existential crisis. In a classroom full of military cadets from species that had spent the last 10,000 years perfecting the art of warfare, the idea that medics, human medics, had somehow held off a hive battle group was roughly equivalent to suggesting that a group of cafeteria workers could take on a squad of battle mechs armed with nothing but kitchen utensils and strongly worded complaints about the working conditions. "I'm sorry, Professor," said Cadet Zilf, her tentacles twitching in what passed for polite confusion among her species. "Did you say medics? As in medical personnel? Non-combatants?" "Technically, yes," Kethvar replied, and there was something in his tone that suggested he'd had this conversation before. Though I should point out that the term non-combatant is somewhat flexible when applied to human military doctrine. This got a few snorts from the human cadets, who were suddenly looking a lot more interested in the proceedings. The engagement began at Iru 347 station time when the hive forces dropped out of hyperspace and immediately began bombardment patterns consistent with a cleanse and harvest operation. The hologram showed the spider ships moving into position, their bioplasma cannons charging with an ominous red glow. Standard protocol for defending a research station would be immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel, while security forces attempt to delay the attackers long enough for reinforcements to arrive. He paused. The nearest Galactic Defense Force unit was approximately 6 hours away at maximum burn. "So they had 6 hours to hold out," observed Cadet Vrex, his scales shifting to a thoughtful purple. "With 12 security officers and obsolete equipment, against 800 hive warriors. Actually," Kethvar corrected, "they had approximately 14 minutes. The confused silence was back, this time with friends. "Sir?" This from one of the human cadets, a tall, lanky specimen who looked like he'd been constructed from spare parts and held together with good intentions and military-issue caffeine. His name tag read Reeves, and he had the kind of eyes that suggested he'd seen things that had probably violated several interspecies treaties against cruel and unusual warfare. "The station's shields failed after the first bombardment," Kethvar explained. "The plasma turrets were destroyed in the second. By the third volley, the hive had breached the outer hull in 17 locations and were beginning boarding operations." The hologram shifted to show the interior of the station, corridors filled with smoke and sparking electronics, while chitinous forms poured through the breaches like a particularly aggressive infestation. "At this point," the professor continued, "the station's commanding officer, Colonel Martinez of the Human Defense Forces, made what most tactical analysts consider either the most brilliant or the most insane decision in modern military history." He gestured, and the hologram zoomed in on a section of the station's medical bay. "Rather than attempt a conventional defense, she ordered all non-essential personnel to evacuate to the medical facilities in the station's core, then tasked the 17 medical corps personnel with handling the situation." "Handling the situation?" Zilf's tentacles were now vibrating with disbelief. "Against 800 hive warriors?" "In fairness," Kethvar said, "she may have been suffering from oxygen deprivation and/or severe head trauma at the time. The medical records are somewhat unclear on this point." More snorts from the human section. Reeves was grinning now, the kind of grin that suggested he knew something the rest of the class didn't. "What followed," the professor continued, "has been the subject of intense study, wild speculation, and what I can only describe as creative reinterpretation of the laws of physics." The hologram began running what looked like security footage from the station's internal cameras. Grainy, black and white, with timestamps showing the progression of events in real time. At 0351 hours, the first wave of hive warriors reached the medical bay. The display showed a corridor filled with the chittering, skittering forms of creatures that looked like someone had taken every nightmare about insects and given them opposable thumbs and an attitude problem. They encountered the first human medic at Junction 7 Alpha. The camera showed a figure in medical fatigues, a woman who looked to be in her 30s, carrying what appeared to be a standard-issue medical kit. She was facing down approximately 30 hive warriors with the kind of calm that usually required either significant chemical enhancement or a complete disconnect from reality. Dr. Liu informed the hive warriors that they were in violation of the Galactic Convention on Medical Neutrality and would need to submit to decontamination procedures before proceeding. The silence in the amphitheater was now approaching the density of a small planet. "Sir," Vrex said slowly, "did she actually expect that to work?" According to her post-action report, she was exploring diplomatic solutions and establishing clear communication protocols with potentially hostile biological entities. Kethvar's tone suggested he'd read this report many times and was still working through the implications. The hologram continued. The Hive warriors, predictably, did not submit to decontamination procedures. What they did was charge at the lone human medic with the kind of enthusiasm that had made their species the galactic equivalent of a horror movie monster. What happened next was difficult to explain. The camera showed the medic moving with a fluidity that seemed to violate several laws of physics, and at least one interspecies treaty on the ethical treatment of enemy combatants. One moment she was standing still, the next she was somehow behind the lead warrior, having apparently relocated there via a route that didn't seem to involve any of the traditional dimensions. The Hive warrior collapsed. Then the next one. Then the one after that. Professor? This from a Zentorian cadet whose 4 eyes were blinking in rapid sequence. What exactly is she doing to them? According to the medical analysis conducted after the engagement, HFY replied, she was administering precision neural disruption via applied pressure to specific chitinous nerve clusters. Translation. She was using her knowledge of hive anatomy to poke them in exactly the right places to shut down their nervous systems. She was turning them off, Reeves said quietly. And there was something in his voice that made the entire amphitheater turn to look at him. Like biological machines. Find the right pressure point, apply the right amount of force, and they just stop. That's essentially correct, HFY admitted. Though I should point out that such techniques require an encyclopedic knowledge of hive physiology that shouldn't have been available to human medical personnel at the time. Shouldn't have been, Reeves repeated, and his grin was taking on a distinctly uncomfortable quality. The hologram continued its playback. More corridors, more encounters. The pattern was always the same. Human medics encountering groups of hive warriors, engaging in what the official reports described as therapeutic intervention, and leaving behind piles of unconscious but breathing insectoid nightmares. By 0417 hours, HFY narrated, the human medical team had successfully treated approximately 400 hive warriors. The remaining 400 had apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor, and had begun what can only be described as a strategic withdrawal. They ran away, translated a human cadet from the back row. From medics, added another. Human medics, specified a third, as if this explained everything. Which, in retrospect, it probably did. The hologram shifted to show the exterior of the station, where the 3 hive bioships were beginning to pull back from their attack positions. Even through the grainy footage, you could practically see them having second thoughts about the whole invasion concept. At 0445 hours, the hive battle group retreated to hyperspace, leaving behind their ground forces and what analysts later determined was approximately 300 tons of biological waste products. They were so scared they literally crapped themselves, Reeves translated. And despite the fact that this was supposed to be a serious academic environment, several cadets started snickering. The official after-action report, HFY continued, determinedly maintaining his professional composure, listed 0 human casualties, 17 hive warriors requiring extended medical treatment for unspecified nervous system dysfunction, and 383 warriors who were subsequently diagnosed with what human psychologists termed acute medic-related anxiety disorder. The silence that followed was broken by a crystalline cadet, whose prismatic body was pulsing with what passed for confusion among her species. Professor, are you telling us that 17 human medics defeated an entire hive battle group by providing medical treatment? Aggressively providing medical treatment, HFY corrected. There's an important distinction. How the hell do you aggressively provide medical treatment? Demanded Zilf, her tentacles now writhing with frustration. This was when Reeves cleared his throat. Well, he said in the kind of casual tone that people use when they're about to drop a conversational nuclear bomb, there are a lot of ways to help someone achieve a better quality of life. Sometimes that involves making sure they take a nice long nap in a quiet, secure location where they can't hurt themselves or others. The way he said it made everyone in the amphitheater turn to look at him again. There was something about his tone, something about the way he was sitting, something about the expression on his face that suggested this wasn't theoretical knowledge. Cadet Reeves, HFY said slowly, do you have something to contribute to this discussion? Reeves was quiet for a moment, looking at the holographic display that was still showing the aftermath of the battle. When he spoke, his voice had lost its casual tone and taken on something that sounded suspiciously like memory. The thing about being a medic, he said, is that your primary job is to preserve life. All life. Even when that life is currently trying to kill you and everyone you care about. He stood up, and there was something about the way he moved that made the entire room fall silent. The hive warriors weren't evil, he continued. They were just programmed. Biological machines running software that said, "Kill everything that isn't us." But machines can be reprogrammed. Biological systems can be modified. And if you know enough about physiology, anatomy, and applied biomedicine... He gestured at the holographic display, at the piles of unconscious hive warriors and the humans standing over them with medical kits in hand. You can perform emergency personality adjustments. The silence that followed was the kind that usually occurs when someone accidentally says something so profound that it requires a complete reevaluation of everything everyone thought they knew about the universe. "Cadet Reeves," Professor Kethvar said carefully. "Exactly what kind of medical training did you receive before joining the academy?" Reeves looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the holographic display. Then he looked back at the professor. "Sir, I think there might be some confusion about my academic background." "Oh?" "Yes, sir. You see, I wasn't a cadet when the Battle of Kepler 442b happened." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, the kind of tone people use when they're stating something so obvious that it shouldn't need to be said. "I was the senior medic in charge of the 42nd Terran Medical Corps Psychiatric Evaluation Team." The silence that followed was so complete that you could have heard a pin drop in the vacuum of space. "I'm sorry," Zilf said eventually, her tentacles now completely motionless. "Did you just say you were there?" "Deck 7, Medical Bay 3, Reeves confirmed. "Had a lovely view of the main corridor. Got to meet a lot of interesting people that day. Well, interesting insects. Some of them are actually quite pleasant once you get them to stop trying to murder you." Professor Kethvar's compound eyes were staring at Reeves with the kind of intensity usually reserved for suspicious cargo manifests or tax audits. "Cadet Reeves, according to your academy records, you're 23 standard years old." "Yes, sir, that's correct." "The Battle of Kepler 442b occurred 9 years ago." "Yes, sir, that's also correct." The mathematics of this statement began to percolate through the collective consciousness of the amphitheater. If Reeves was 23 now, and the battle had occurred 9 years ago, that meant... You were 12? Rex's scales had shifted to a color that didn't have a name in any known language, but probably translated to something like existential horror mixed with confused admiration. 12 standard years, yes sir. Though I should point out that I'd been working with the medical corps for about a year and a half at that point, so I wasn't exactly a rookie. "You were working with the military at 12? This from the crystalline cadet, whose prismatic form was now cycling through colors so rapidly that she looked like a living rainbow having an anxiety attack. "Well, working is a strong word," Reeves said thoughtfully. "More like occasionally helping out when they needed someone small enough to fit in tight spaces and too young to know that what they were asking was probably impossible." He sat back down, apparently unaware that he'd just casually rewritten everyone's understanding of human child development and labor laws. "The thing about humans," he continued conversationally, "is that we don't really have a standard operating procedure for what to do when the galactic nightmare insects show up to murder everyone you know. So we tend to improvise." "Improvise," Kethvar repeated flatly. "Yes, sir. It's one of our better qualities. We're very good at making things up as we go along, especially when the alternative is everyone dying horribly." The professor turned to his datapad and began scrolling through what was presumably Reeves's personnel file. His compound eyes were moving in patterns that suggested he was reading very quickly and not particularly liking what he was finding. "Cadet Reeves," he said eventually, "your file indicates that you've completed advanced certifications in xenobiology, comparative anatomy, battlefield medicine, psychological warfare, and..." He paused. "Applied thanatology? That's the study of death and dying, for anyone who's curious," Reeves explained helpfully. "Very useful field. Helps you understand the difference between mostly dead and completely dead, which is surprisingly important in field medicine." "Why?" asked Zilf in a voice that suggested she was afraid of the answer. "Would a medic need to study psychological warfare?" Reeves considered this question with the kind of seriousness that suggested he'd given it some thought before. "Well," he said finally, "sometimes the best way to help someone is to convince them that they don't actually want to be in a fight. And sometimes the best way to do that is to demonstrate, in a clear and educational manner, exactly what fighting with you would entail." He gestured at the holographic display where the security footage was still showing the aftermath of 17 humans systematically treating 800 hive warriors. "For example, if you're facing an enemy whose entire military doctrine is based on overwhelming numerical superiority and biological terror, sometimes the most therapeutic approach is to show them that their numbers don't matter, and that you're significantly more terrifying than they are. By non-lethally disabling 400 of them in under an hour, Kethvar said. Exactly. See, you get it. We didn't kill anyone. We just helped them achieve a better understanding of their own mortality and the relative wisdom of different life choices. A Centaurian cadet raised 2 of his 4 hands. But how did you know enough about hive physiology to do that? I mean, the war had only been going on for 6 months at that point. Oh, that's easy, Reeves replied. I read their medical journals. The silence that followed was so profound that it approached the theoretical limit of how quiet things could get before reality itself started to have doubts. Their medical journals? Vrex asked weakly. Sure. The Hive Collective maintains very detailed biological records. They're actually quite fascinating from a scientific perspective. Did you know that their neural clusters follow a fractal pattern that's mathematically identical to certain types of human brainwaves? It's really quite elegant once you understand the underlying principles. How? Asked the crystalline cadet. Did you get access to classified Hive medical data? Reeves looked at her as if this was a strange question. I asked nicely. The pause that followed contained multitudes. You! Asked nicely, Kethvar repeated. Well, to be more precise, I captured a Hive medical specialist, explained that I was conducting a cross-species medical research project, and offered to share my data on human psychology if they'd share their data on Hive physiology. And they agreed to this? Eventually, after I demonstrated that I could keep them unconscious for varying lengths of time depending on where I pressed on their carapace. Turns out that even hive-mind insects appreciate the value of academic cooperation when the alternative is indefinite nap time. Reeves said all of this in the same tone that most people would use to describe their lunch plans. Let me get this straight, said another human cadet from the back row. You performed medical experiments on a captured enemy? I performed cooperative medical research with a voluntary participant, Reeves corrected. There's an important ethical distinction. I made sure they were comfortable, well-fed, and fully informed about all procedures. Plus, I let them keep copies of all the research data. Did this research contribute to winning the war? Asked Zilf. Well, 3 months later, the Hive Collective sent a formal diplomatic note to the Galactic Defense Force requesting a ceasefire and negotiations for what they termed mutually beneficial medical and cultural exchange programs. Reeves shrugged. I'm sure that was just a coincidence. Professor Kethvar had given up on his datapad and was now staring at Reeves with the kind of expression that professors get when they realize that one of their students has casually rewritten the textbook they've been teaching from for the last decade. Cadet Reeves, he said carefully, are you telling this class that you personally ended the Hive War? Oh no, sir. That would be presumptuous. Reeves looked genuinely offended by the suggestion. It was a team effort. I just provided some medical consultation and cultural translation services. The actual diplomacy was handled by much more qualified people. Cultural translation services? This from Vrex, whose scales were now cycling through what appeared to be the entire visible spectrum and a few colors that probably shouldn't exist in normal space. Sure. See, the thing about the Hive is that they're not actually malicious. They're just really, really bad at communicating with non-Hive species. Their entire social structure is based on shared consciousness and biological imperatives. So the concept of individual choice and autonomous decision-making is basically incomprehensible to them. He gestured at the holographic display again, where the security footage was still running its loop of impossible events. When they showed up to cleanse and harvest the research station, they weren't trying to commit genocide. They were trying to perform what they considered to be large-scale medical intervention on what they perceived as a bunch of sick individuals who were suffering from disconnection syndrome. Disconnection syndrome? Asked the crystalline cadet. That's what they called the condition of not being part of a hive mind. From their perspective, every non-hive species was basically suffering from severe mental illness. They were trying to cure us. The implications of this statement began to sink in. The entire Hive War, 3 years of interspecies conflict, billions of casualties, whole star systems evacuated, had been a massive medical misunderstanding. So when you treated their warriors, Kethvar said slowly, you were demonstrating that humans had our own approach to medical intervention, Reeves confirmed. Once they understood that we were capable of performing our own large-scale biological modifications, namely putting their entire boarding party into therapeutic unconsciousness, they realized that maybe we weren't as sick as they'd initially diagnosed. And the psychological warfare aspect? Well, once they understood that we weren't suffering from disconnection syndrome, they had to reevaluate their entire assessment of human psychology. Turns out that when you're dealing with a species that's not supposed to be able to function without a hive mind, but somehow manages to coordinate complex military operations anyway, you start to wonder what other assumptions about baseline reality might need to be reconsidered. Reeves paused, looking thoughtful. Plus, I may have mentioned during my cultural exchange sessions that humans considered the application of non-consensual medical treatment to be a serious breach of our social protocols, and that continued violations might result in us exploring more aggressive therapeutic interventions. More aggressive than disabling 400 warriors in an hour? Asked Zilf. Oh, that wasn't aggressive at all, Reeves said, sounding genuinely surprised. That was just basic triage. We were helping them achieve a calm, restful state so they could recover from the stress of armed conflict. Aggressive intervention would have been different. The way he said different made everyone in the amphitheater suddenly very interested in not finding out what that might involve. The really important thing, Reeves continued, was establishing clear communication protocols. Once the Hive understood that humans were willing and able to engage in medical diplomacy, everything got a lot easier. Turns out that when you approach interspecies conflict as a public health issue rather than a military problem, you get much better outcomes for everyone involved. Professor Kethvar was now staring at his datapad as if it had personally offended him and possibly insulted his ancestors. Cadet Reeves, he said eventually, according to your file, you've also completed certifications in, let me see, advanced robotics, quantum mechanics, theoretical xenopsychology, applied ethics, interspecies law, and, he paused again, emergency leadership? That last one was sort of accidental, Reeves admitted. Turns out that when you're the only person in a room who knows how to keep everyone alive, people start asking you to make decisions about other things too. It's really quite inconvenient. What other things? Oh, strategic planning, resource allocation, personnel management, diplomatic negotiations. He shrugged. The usual stuff you have to deal with when you're trying to keep a research station operational while also conducting impromptu medical research on a previously unknown species. While you were 14 years old. 13, actually, for most of it. I turned 14 about halfway through the siege. The silence that followed was the kind that usually requires advanced mathematics to properly calculate. Cadet Reeves, said a voice from the back of the amphitheater. It was Colonel Williams, the Academy's Dean of Strategic Studies, who had apparently been observing the class and had been quietly having what appeared to be a minor existential crisis. Yes, sir? Why? The colonel asked in a carefully controlled voice. Are you here? Reeves blinked. Sir? Why are you attending the Galactic Defense Academy? According to what you've just told us, you have more practical military experience than most of our instructors. You've personally ended at least one interspecies war, and you've apparently been conducting advanced xenobiological research since you were 12 years old. What exactly are you hoping to learn here? Reeves considered this question with the kind of careful attention that suggested it was something he'd thought about before. Well, sir, he said eventually, I figured it was probably time I got some formal education in all the stuff I've been making up as I go along. Plus, my mom said I should probably try to have a normal college experience before I get too old. A normal college experience? Yes, sir. Studying things in classrooms instead of figuring them out while people are shooting at you. Making friends who aren't either trying to kill me or asking me to solve their species' existential problems. Maybe taking some art classes. Art classes. I've always wanted to try pottery. It seems very peaceful. Colonel Williams looked like he was having the kind of day that usually required significant amounts of alcohol and possibly professional counseling. Cadet Reeves, he said finally, would you be interested in transferring to our accelerated command track program? Oh, no thank you, sir. I'm really enjoying the regular curriculum. Plus, I'm taking beginning pottery next semester, and I understand there's quite a waiting list. The colonel turned to Professor Kethvar. Professor, I think we may need to revise our teaching materials. Which ones, sir? All of them. Professor Kethvar looked at the holographic display, which was still showing the aftermath of 17 human medics casually redefining the nature of interspecies conflict. Then he looked at Reeves, who was now taking notes on his own performance with the kind of academic detachment that suggested he was mentally preparing to write a paper on the experience. Yes, sir, he said finally. I think that might be advisable. The rest of the class passed in something resembling a daze. Professor Kethvar gamely continued his lecture on tactical analysis and strategic planning, but everyone's attention kept drifting back to Reeves, who was sitting quietly in his seat, occasionally raising his hand to offer clarifications on points of medical procedure or cultural interpretation. By the time the period ended, half the cadets were looking at him like he was some sort of mythical creature, and the other half were looking like they were reconsidering their chosen career paths. As the amphitheater emptied out, Zilf approached Reeves with the kind of careful movements that suggested she was approaching something that might explode. So, she said tentatively. What's it like being, legendary? Reeves looked genuinely confused. Legendary? You ended a war when you were 14. You personally defeated a hive battle group. You've revolutionized interspecies medicine. You're probably going to be in history books. Oh. Reeves packed up his notes with the kind of methodical precision that suggested he'd been trained to keep track of his equipment under adverse conditions. I guess I never really thought about it that way. How do you think about it? He considered the question while shouldering his backpack, which looked suspiciously like it contained more equipment than any normal student should need for a morning of classes. I think about it as doing my job, he said finally. I'm a medic. My job is to keep people alive and healthy. Sometimes that means bandaging wounds, sometimes it means performing surgery, and sometimes it means having difficult conversations with people who are making poor life choices. Poor life choices like invading research stations? Exactly. The Hive warriors were clearly suffering from some sort of behavioral disorder that was causing them to engage in high-risk activities that were likely to result in personal injury. As a medical professional, it was my responsibility to intervene. He said this with the same tone that most people would use to describe treating a scraped knee. Plus, he added, it was a really good learning experience. I got to expand my knowledge of xenobiology, practice my crisis management skills, and help establish some important precedents for interspecies medical ethics. And everyone survived, which is always the preferred outcome. Zilf stared at him for a moment, her tentacles twitching in what might have been admiration or possibly fear. Reeves, she said finally, you're either the most well-adjusted person I've ever met, or the most terrifying. He considered this seriously. I think those might be the same thing, he said. After all, the most dangerous people are usually the ones who are completely comfortable with who they are and what they're capable of. With that, he headed for the exit, leaving Zilf standing in the empty amphitheater with the distinct impression that she'd just had a conversation with someone who could probably end wars with a strongly worded medical recommendation and a really thorough physical examination. Behind them, the holographic display finally shut down, leaving only the faint afterglow of a battle that had redefined what it meant to provide medical care in a hostile universe. Professor Kethvar remained at his lectern for several minutes after the last student left, staring at his notes and wondering if maybe it was time to consider retirement. Or possibly a career change. Something nice and peaceful, like explosive ordnance disposal or negotiating trade agreements with hostile alien governments. After all, compared to trying to teach military history to someone who'd personally made most of it, those jobs were starting to look refreshingly straightforward.